There is a stretch of water in the Middle East that is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and yet every single day around 20 million barrels of oil pass through it. That's roughly 1/5 of all the oil consumed on Earth. Alongside it, nearly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas moves through the same corridor. Not to mention, the region's riches in petrochemicals are the building blocks of synthetic fertilizers across the world. I am of course talking about the Strait of Hormuz. The narrow waterway is currently at the forefront of global news given the ongoing Israeli-American war with Iran. Up until the present administration, American presidents were antagonistic but cautious with Iran, and a large part of that is due to fears of the Iranians closing the strait. The theory was, and as it's playing out before our eyes, closing the strait would lead to surges in oil prices and global markets panicking, or even worse, crashing. The geopolitics of this crucial choke point has been complexified by the fact that, since 1979, Iran has been ruled as a theocracy that is massively hostile to US foreign policy. In this video, I'm going to explore the history of the Strait of Hormuz and explain why it matters more today than ever before. The modern oil industry has only been around since the mid-19th century, but the Strait of Hormuz's significance stretches far beyond that. It's not difficult to see why. The strait sits at the cross-section of India and the Middle East, two bastions of ancient civilization. The etymology of the name Hormuz has multiple theories, but the one that makes the most sense to me is it being derived from Ormuzd, another name for Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity in Zoroastrianism. From the perspective of global economic history, the strait played a pivotal role in linking trade between the Indian Ocean and Europe via the conduit of Middle Eastern Silk Road cities. For centuries, this route was used by merchants transporting spices from India, Arabian horses, textiles, precious metals, and other luxury goods, amongst many other things. Ports along the Gulf prospered or declined based on access to these trade flows. A key center of this trade was the city of Hormuz, on the island of Hormuz. This was the capital of the medieval kingdom of Hormuz, set up sometime towards the end of the 11th century as a dependency of the Seljuk Sultanate of Kirman. In time, the kingdom of Hormuz would come to encompass narrow strips of land on both sides of the Gulf, in coastal Iran and coastal Oman. For the next 2 centuries, this island served as a transcontinental trading hub, handling significant commercial traffic. As a result of its status as an entrepot and charging tolls, Hormuz Island became obscenely wealthy. Due to this wealth, travelers to Hormuz also wrote at length of the avarice and sexual decadence present on the island. At the start of the 15th century, the Chinese general Zheng He visited Hormuz as part of the epic Ming treasure voyages, and his crew members spoke glowingly about the splendor of Hormuz and the high standard of living of even the lower classes of society. These voyages provide historical continuity for the present Chinese government's efforts to expand China's soft power to other regions through trade and development. In fact, some speculate China's aid to the Iranian government in the current conflict is crucial, mainly in the shape of intelligence. In return, China desperately needs cheap Iranian oil for its industrializing appetite. Up until around 1500 AD, if the dynastic house in charge of the area surrounding the strait changed hands, there was still a degree of continuity in trade. But from the 1500s onwards, this would all change, as European states were on the prowl for control of key economic locations in the Age of Sail. Portugal emerged as an early forerunner in the Age of Discovery, as intrepid Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan pioneered new routes to Asia. Portuguese colonial practice focused on controlling vital trading port cities rather than spreading their imperial presence inland. From the late 1490s onwards, the Portuguese started a blitzkrieg campaign of gaining pivotal ports in the Indian Ocean. Muscat in 1507, Goa in 1510, Malacca in 1511. By 1515, Hormuz too was under their control. They profited massively from Hormuz, largely from the custom revenue and tolls they placed. It is estimated that Portugal received 200,000 cruzados annually from Hormuz, a massive number considering the Portuguese crown's entire annual revenue in the mid-16th century would have been roughly 1 million cruzados annually. It's interesting to note that Iran's current attempts to charge a fee for safe conduct through the Strait of Hormuz has a historical precedent in the Portuguese Cartas system. This system in the Persian Gulf would collapse along with Portuguese dominion over Hormuz in 1622, when a Safavid expedition expelled them from the island with the help of the nascent British East India Company. Unfortunately for the island of Hormuz, from this point onwards, Persian Gulf trade shifted to the nearby city of Bandar Abbas. For the next 300 years, the strait remained a key passageway for trade in the Indian Ocean. European powers continued to jostle for control of key port cities, with the British coming out on top by the turn of the 20th century. By this point, a new type of European explorer had emerged, one that was not as interested in naval voyages, but more so in the black gold liquid in the ground. With the 1908 discovery of oil in Iran, European business interests flocked to the region to drill for a resource that would soon fuel the world. If the Strait of Hormuz had been important before, it would now become invaluable. Between 1927 and 1939, the Persian Gulf states of Iraq, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar had large reserves of oil discovered on their territories. Of course, the vast majority of the profits would go to Western oil companies who helped to extract the oil. Soon enough, millions of barrels were being exported daily, all passing through the Strait of Hormuz. By the mid-20th century, industrial economies in Europe, America, and later Asia became heavily dependent on this flow. Seeing the financial potential behind oil, native states started to nationalize their oil industries. An early attempt at this was carried out by the Iranian government of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh when he expelled the British in 1951. Within months, the British Royal Navy was patrolling the Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf, essentially resulting in an embargo of Iranian oil. Just 2 years later, Mossadegh would be toppled by a CIA-engineered coup and reinstating the influence of Western oil companies. But Iranians would not forget about this episode. Just 25 years later, the world's eyes were turned to Hormuz once again. A revolution was brewing on the streets of Iran. Young people, the ulama, and the Bazari merchants flocked to renounce the Shah's regime for its corruption and ineffectiveness. By February 1979, the Shah had been toppled and Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile to lead the country. Prior to the revolution, the Shah had been a close ally of the US. But with the advent of theocratic rule, Iran became one of the most principal adversaries of American interests in the region. Viewing the US as nothing more than a continuation of European imperial practices, Khomeini and his cadre maintained an antagonistic stance towards the US and its ally, Israel. This created a new reality. One of the countries that borders the strait and has a commanding geographic position over it was now hostile to the dominant global power. From this point forward, the Strait of Hormuz was no longer just an economic lifeline. It became a geopolitical pressure point. Before Iranians could recover from the shock of revolution, their country was invaded the very next year by neighboring Iraq. Saddam Hussein, buoyed by support from both Cold War superpowers, hoped to take advantage of the fracture left by the revolution in Iran. But Saddam and the world would watch in disbelief as the splintered Iranian military held their ground, despite Iraq's numerically and technologically superior army. Global fears about the Strait of Hormuz persisted throughout 8 years of brutal warfare. In fact, Saddam repeatedly tried to provoke Iran into closing the strait, at which point the US would have to intervene in his favor. Iraq's Air Force bombed the Iranian Kharg Islands oil facilities numerous times. The tanker war subsequently erupted, where both sides began targeting vessels carrying their enemy's oil. An estimated 546 commercial vessels were damaged. Insurance costs for shipping dramatically increased as mines and missiles turned the Gulf into a battlefield. Having seen enough, the US launched Operation Earnest Will in 1987, offering protection to tankers by reflagging them with the American flag. This courtesy was of course not extended to neutral tankers shipping to and from Iran. There's no reason to assume that this strategy cannot be replicated by America in its present-day conflict with Iran. Naturally, Operation Earnest Will produced a few confrontations between Iran and the US. But the war soon ended as the war-weary Iraqis and Iranians declared a ceasefire in August 1988. Going into the war, the price of oil had experienced significant spikes, largely because of the crisis brought on by the Yom Kippur War of 1973 and the 1979 Iranian Revolution. But because of the price hikes, there was a significant surplus of crude oil as countries bought less. This resulted in the 1980s oil glut, which saw the price of oil decrease massively. As a result, the Iran-Iraq war did not produce as much oil panic as the conflict in the Gulf at the moment. Since then, Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz several times. It can be plausibly inferred that this fear of closure prevented multiple US administrations from invading Iran. Which brings us to the present conflict between Iran and the US alongside Israel. I'd love to do a video on the conflict in the future, but for now, the summary is as follows. On October 7, 2023, fighters from Hamas, the Palestinian nationalist group which governs Gaza, broke out of their blockade and launched attacks on Israeli territory. Israel then proceeded to bomb Gaza to the ground. America and Israel expanded the theater of war in June 2025 when it launched a massive bombing campaign of Iran. The 12-day war, as it's now known, served to be a precursor to the current war which started on February 28, 2026. With the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei being assassinated on the first day of the war, authority fractured into the hands of different Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders. On March 2nd, the IRGC stated it was closing the Strait of Hormuz. This was a major escalation because the strait is now more important and more dangerous than at any point in its history. As mentioned at the top of the video, 1/5 of the world's oil and gas flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Some of the Gulf countries are amongst the richest on the planet in the black gold liquid. Because the world's attention is on oil, we often tend to forget that one of the most important ingredients of synthetic fertilizers is derived from natural gas. Via the Haber-Bosch process, hydrogen is extracted from the natural gas and mixed with nitrogen from the air to produce ammonia. Ammonia is then mixed with carbon dioxide to create urea, the most widely used fertilizer. Considering how narrow the strait is, with shipping lanes being only about 2 miles wide, it has become one of the most vulnerable choke points on Earth. Ships cannot avoid those lanes, and from the northern coastline, Iran overlooks Hormuz. Cognizant of this strategic advantage, Iran's government have developed capabilities specifically for this environment. Naval mines, anti-ship missiles covering the strait, fast attack boats using swarm tactics, and drones for surveillance as well as strikes. This creates powerful leverage for Iran. Even without acting, just the threat of closure influences global behavior. Since February 28th, there have been multiple days where oil prices have risen almost 10% in a single day. That's an unstable amount of volatility. This is largely connected to shipping insurance premiums, taken out to protect the valuable cargo on board merchant vessels. These insurance premiums spike in times of war in the Gulf because vessels could come under attack. When the tanker war broke out in the 1980s, the world was experiencing a decrease in demand for oil, so the damage was not properly felt. But today, the demand for oil is insatiable. This is reflected in its price. In February 2026, it was $73 per barrel, whilst today, less than 3 months later, it is more than $106 per barrel. That's an increase of almost 50%, a monumental number that'll seriously harm prominent economies across Europe and Asia. Far Eastern countries like China, India, Japan, and South Korea heavily depend on uninterrupted flow from the Gulf. The US has utilized its superpower status to justify maintaining a permanent naval presence in the region. The Fifth Fleet has been stationed in Bahrain since 1995, constantly replete with some 20 warships. Therefore, controlling the Strait of Hormuz goes a long way to controlling a large chunk of the Middle East. No wonder the IRGC are so bullish about their prospects in this war against perhaps the most powerful empire in history. Tehran knows that the world cannot bypass the Strait of Hormuz. There are some alternatives. The Saudis built the East-West pipeline in the 1980s, interestingly enough, to bypass the tanker war between Iran and Iraq in the Gulf. This pipeline transports 5 million barrels per day from the oil-rich fields in the eastern province to the port city of Yanbu on the Red Sea coast. UAE took a page out of their book by completing the Habshan Fujairah oil pipeline in 2012, which is capable of pumping out 1.5 million barrels a day. As impressive as both are, they don't even come close to covering the 20 million plus barrels a day which move through Hormuz. Disruption in Hormuz means a massive portion of global supply is removed. Consequently, the Strait of Hormuz is irreplaceable. This gives the IRGC an alarming amount of leverage in its war with the US and Israel. And now, with the resumption of conflict, Iran's allies, the Houthis of Yemen, have announced that the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is now closed to Saudi Arabia. Between the closure of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb, the disruptions brought to the oil industry could bring about a global economic crisis. All these different factors combine to make the Strait of Hormuz a place where geography creates vulnerability, history creates patterns, and power creates tension. I often see comments under my videos asking why is there always conflict in the Middle East? Well, the Middle East is considered the birthplace of civilization, and there are few things civilization has mastered more than warfare. As the world order continues to be reshaped before our eyes, look to this region, especially the Gulf, to play a crucial role in the rise and fall of civilizations. As usual, I want to thank my Patreons for their generous support. If you want to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description to this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoyed this video. Until next time, peace!